right? And I think Dalton Rushing, I think one of the reasons we talk about him as much as we have is like Dalton Rushing thinks he's a star, right? I mean, we know what's best for Dalton Rushing at some point is probably that he finds somewhere else to go and kind of become the player.
This is obviously in the grand scheme of things a pretty minor thing. I think what happened today, but it was interesting to see like Otani and somebody else sort of like butt heads or have miscommunication or however you want to describe it. And
大谷とラッシングのバッテリーは、大谷が試合中にラッシングに怒り、ラッシングは大谷に感情をむき出しにしたなど、マスコミやファンの議論の的となっています。この件に関し、ラッシングを強く批判する人もいれば、擁護する人もいて、様々な意見が飛び交います。今回は、大谷を最も身近に見る、ドジャース番記者のハリス氏と、エンゼルスの頃から見る、ヘルナンデス氏の見解を訳しました。
speaking of inconvenienced, the Dodgers did win. Today, as we record on this Wednesday night, they swept the Twins. They continue to have the most wins in baseball. You know, all the big picture stuff with them seems to be going okay. Even Kyle Tucker, which I know you hit on the episode on Monday with David Bassett, is supposed to be back in the lineup on Friday. But it was an adventurous game today, especially with Shohei Otani and Dalton Rushing, who had some miscommunication. There were these scenes of Rushing getting consoled or encouraged in the dugout from everybody from Freddie Freeman to Dave Roberts. I know both guys talked about it after the game. Again, a game the Dodgers still won, a game that Otani, I still think, like ended up pitching okay in and would have like 8 strikeouts, got through the 6th inning again, keeps his ERA under 1.5. But what did you make of today's scene? What was it like in the moment? And we'll dive kind of deeper into Otani too and how his pitching has gone the last couple times. But what did we learn about kind of him and Rushing? What's to me a really just kind of fascinating dynamic of the biggest star in the game, like the youngest or one of the youngest players on the Dodgers team, and somebody who is really hard on himself, but is the kind of moment that can be kind of formative in a young player's career if handled the right way. Kind of what all happened there today?
Yeah, so I think, what watching it, what I thought of, like the kind of the first thing that came to my mind is something AJ Ellis said years ago, right? And AJ Ellis was kind of this like journeyman-ish catcher who kind of became Clayton Kershaw's like designated guy, one became one of his closest friend on the team. And what Ellis used to like to say was, a catcher is basically a servant. You're serving the pitcher, right? And I think Dalton Rushing, I think one of the reasons we talk about him as much as we have is like Dalton Rushing thinks he's a star, right? I mean, the universe revolves around Dalton Rushing, I think, in Dalton Rushing's head.
Yeah,
And I think,
or maybe thinks
look,
he's
and
going
I
to
think
become a star.
right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? It's just, and look, and that's in some cases really good. I mean, if you look at his offensive performance earlier this year, I would argue is that, I mean, most guys in his position, played sparingly last year and wasn't great. Like you don't come into this year thinking like, oh, I'm going to be great. This guy thought he was going to be great, and he was great at least at the beginning. So I think to me, it's kind of this, now Dave Roberts brought up a fair point when I brought up the air, Ellis Kershaw comp, right? Especially in terms of Ellis kind of seemed to know how to kind of get in and out of conversations with Kershaw without angering him more. And it was just that everything that Rushing did seemed to really upset Otani. And it just kind of kept growing and growing
Because
and growing.
because
And
let's
this
go through
started
this.
yeah, so
Yeah,
let's start. Actually, this is the one most people miss, right? What the one people missed was in the first inning, there was this borderline strike that Otani wanted him to challenge. Rushing says no. It was a strike, by the way, right? So I think
and this
Otani was already, yeah,
and that goes back to that game in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago when Dalton Rushing didn't challenge a couple close calls in an inning that ended up getting away from Otani. So this is not the
right,
first instance that we've seen this.
yeah. And then in the second inning, well, it was interesting because sitting next to me was Yu Suzuki, a former professional pitcher for the Oryx Buffaloes. He used to be a locker mate of Yoshinobu Yamamoto in Japan. He now does the wildly successful Japanese podcast 50-50 with me. But anyway, so we're watching this inning kind of unfold, and Yu says like, "Hey, I think Otani's finger's messed up." right? And it's basically keeping him from throwing the sweeper and throwing the curveball, and that's why he keeps throwing this splitter that he can't seem to control at all, right? Otherwise, like, why would he be throwing this pitch? So you already kind of notice, like in the pitch selection, that something kind of seemed like wrong, right? And now he's falling behind in counts, he's giving up hits, balls are kind of getting hit hard, and you can kind of just see the frustration kind of starting to build. The first run scored on a pass ball where according to Otani, after what happened was that he got two signals from the pitch com, and right, so I guess it was curveball and then fastball, and then he was like, "Well, he hit fastball second, so I threw him a fastball," and the thing just sails right by him. Rushing kind of didn't help that because when he went to go collect the ball, he almost like glares back at the mound, and. So basically, in the third inning, Otani decides that he is going to start calling his own pitches. And look, my guess is that there was a part of him that was kind of like, okay, like I'm really gonna like step on the gas now to make sure that guy knows it's his fault because Otani was incredible. I think he struck out the side in the next inning, right? And, like
Yes, he
everything's
did.
like over 100. Like he was nasty, right? Or the breaking balls are disgusting. Yeah, he transformed into the best pitcher in baseball over the next four innings there. And I do, and there was one inning, I think, where they kind of came, where they're coming off the field. They have this little discussion. Now, the ump kind of breaks up the discussion as they're kind of walking off because, he has to check Otani's hands for like sticky stuff, whatever. But one thing that you did see as Otani gets pulled away, he kind of slams his glove on his thigh. So there's frustration there, and yeah, so what we saw, I think probably, rushing afterwards, talked about how embarrassed he was. He wouldn't get into specifics about what he was embarrassed about. But he did, to his credit, look, and I'm sure people kind of talk to him, right? That, look, you cannot be showing up the superstar. Now, I'm like, again, on one hand, I love that about rushing, that he has the balls. Can I even say that? You're just going to have to bleep that. Okay. That he has the, or does he can bleep that he has the what would you call it, the testicular fortitude to stand up to the
There you
biggest
go.
to stand up to the biggest star in the sport like that. But that's kind of not what you do, right? I mean, because the team is just kind of so reliant on Otani. You don't need to be adding to this guy's like kind of frustration. Now look, it was a good first step after the game in terms of, rushing kind of acknowledging like, hey, like that one was on me. I have to be better. I'm embarrassed. Now he didn't really again, I asked him now, right, because at bats were also bad. I mean, he almost had an immaculate inning of his own. His first at bat, he struck out on three pitches. Second at bat, he struck out on three pitches. Third at bat, strike one, strike two.
I watched
Barely
this at
fouled,
bat.
yeah, barely fouls off a pitch to avoid the self-immaculate inning. Takes the ball and then strikes out on the next pitch. Right, but he had a rough night at the plate too. I mean, this is probably one of the rougher nights that he had as a professional. And again, like you kind of take in like the personality and kind of right what it means to him, obviously, and it kind of wound up in real like again, like everybody kind of kept their mouth shut afterwards, right? And they kind of kept it in house as they should, something like this. But my suspicion is, they right, Dave Roberts had his arm around them, like, hey, don't worry, he wants to call his own pitches, that's fine, he's a star, it's okay. Don't take it personally. At some point, Freddie Freeman came over, as he was kind of like licking his wounds. And so you kind of do wonder psychologically where does this kind of put him? Again, I think it's a good, look, I'm sure he's probably like not happy right now, but he did at least say the right thing. And he kind of acknowledged that, hey, you know what? He's Otani and I'm not. And that is kind of step one in terms of kind of going forward from here. Because look, it doesn't sound like Will Smith is coming back anytime soon, right? Or like, at least this is not going to be, I mean, it sounds like this is going to be more than a week type thing, right? We asked Robertson to come back in San Diego. No. So this kind of looks like it could last a little bit. And, the Dodgers have obviously kind of been kind of careful with how they've handled this. And so, they're going to have to go with rushing for a while. And now you have to ask yourself, I mean, is this going to be, right? Because if this doesn't go well, this turns into a Becky Robinson is going to turn into the old, Austin Barnes catching
He's the
Clayton
new
Kershaw.
AJ Elliott.
Right. Yeah, he's going to be the guy, right? I want that guy catching me. And you don't want that as rushing, right? And like, look, and realistically, if Will Smith comes back, right? Is there really like a place for both guys on this team long term? I'm not so sure, right? And probably, what's best for Dalton Rushing at some point is probably that he finds somewhere else to go and kind of become the player that he wants to be. I mean, realistically, it is, right? I mean, it's just not, if you're here and assuming Will Smith does not move off the catching position, right, he's not going to kind of get the opportunities that he's going to want to get in Major League Baseball without going somewhere else. But I do think how you enter an organization is very important, right? And it's one thing if it's like, oh, you know what, that's the guy that, right, that's Joe Montana now kind of stuck behind Steve Young, like, let's go get Joe Montana. That's one thing, right? It's a whole different thing. It's like, oh, that's the guy that, the best player in the world did not want to pitch to anymore. And so we're going to kind of take him. And I do think things like that do kind of make a difference. So this is a big thing for Rushing. And again, I think his post-game address with the media was, that was kind of the right first step. And let's kind of see where it goes from here.
Okay. But before we trade Dalton Rushing, here's what struck me watching this all unfold today is it's really the first time I think we've seen publicly that, like, when Otani got here, he's such a big star. And even for all the other stars the Dodgers have had, they've done a really good job of avoiding these situations where, like, there's ego or there's like obviously like one guy gets prioritized or another. Like, that happens, but I don't think we've really seen it play out very often where it's like guys feuding on the field, which happens, right? We've seen it like with Giants guys this year. We've seen it obviously play out very ugly with the Mets, and the Dodgers have come nowhere near even having a situation like this. And this is obviously, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty minor thing, I think, what happened today. But it was interesting to see like Otani and somebody else sort of like butt heads or have miscommunication or however you want to describe it. And what was encouraging to me, like if you're looking for a silver lining out of this, it is that the guys went up to Rushing in the dugout the way they did. It's that Rushing did, as you pointed out, give the kind of quotes he did after. It's that Otani did not throw him under the bus. And this was the kind of situation to me today that kind of speaks to when the Dodgers talk about having like a clubhouse culture and being able to make all of these big stars and personalities work. It's in part because of this. And now look, obviously, like Otani and Rushing, it's going to be pretty easy to figure out who falls into their places there. But that was kind of the first thing that struck me about this, as like, this is a good example of how these guys have created this environment where nobody gets in each other's way, even with all the big names that they have on the team. The second part is that the Otani, like, look, Dalton Rushing had not caught Otani before Will Smith got hurt. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think we're seeing now part of it. I will say, Dalton Rushing's work with other pitchers, by all accounts, is good, especially like the young pitchers that he obviously is going to have a better relationship with, that he came up with at various times in the minor league system, that he's just been around more. You know, I think Justin Robleski especially has talked about how much he's enjoyed pitching to Dalton Rushing this year. Alex Vezia was talking the other night when he had a safe situation about how Dalton Rushing came out to the mound and kind of pounded on the chest, and after he walked his leadoff guy and said, you know, you got this, get in there. So, like, it's not that Dalton Rushing is bad catching everyone. It is just in this kind of specific thing. I think Otani is and Dave Roberts, I think, has said as much. Like, there is a nuance that comes with pitching to him, and probably a way to like communicate with him. Probably speaks well of Will Smith, who I know has caught some heat at times for his own like pitch sequencing and decisions behind the plate, but for what he brings. And I think it kind of just underscores, right? Like, it's like dealing with or having Otani around, like, it's just a different guy to have as a teammate and a young player who, yes, is very hard-headed and blunt with his emotions and wears his emotions on his sleeve. Like, it was just fascinating to me to watch him be kind of on the other end of this situation with him. The last thing I want to touch on is with Otani's pitching himself. So in these last 3 starts now, which have all been to Dalton Rushing, but it's now 11 runs, 9 earned runs in his last 19 innings. Seems like there's been a couple of these innings where the frustrations or whatever else aside, he's kind of gotten singled to death and has not been able to get out of them. My take on this is good for Otani and the Dodgers for him to have to go through a stretch like this. You think back to last year. He went from
So I thought
basically
Rushing will never have to. So I thought Rushing will never catch him again. That this will break open the door for Chucky Robinson. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, like, look, because this is going to become like a real question now, right? Was this because I think our assumption was, okay, well, this is all kind of starting to add up, and he's tired and whatever, right? And it's like, well, I mean, who is behind the plate? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know, man. Like, because this is. I don't think he just like exploded out of nowhere either, right? This
Yeah.
is probably, in retrospect, I mean, because that was one thing Otani did mention. He said kind of like in terms of like, because one thing he kind of made it sound like was, kind of like, okay, it's like, some of it is also like the in-game stuff, right? You see the way they're kind of approaching things. And, Otani obviously having so many weapons has a lot of stuff at his disposal, and he wants to throw off tinier guys and, right, mix in different things. And, here's this guy that kind of basically right? He's a guy that's kind of been used to, driving an automatic Toyota, which is totally fine. I drive an automatic Toyota, but all of a sudden now he's given a Ferrari and he kind of doesn't know what to do with it. And I think that might be kind of the frustration that like Otani says there, right? And he did reference also the last start, right? That, well, it was like this last time too.
Yeah.
And so,
even in Pittsburgh, he talked about, I had
Yeah.
to shake him off more, things like that.
yeah,
But all that aside, the fact
Chucky
that
time.
no, the fact I think you actually just let
Chucky time.
Dalton keep catching him, and because there is a scenario this year where you get to October and Will Smith gets hurt or something, and Dalton Rushing is going to be back there. Like, you do want to make sure that like these guys can work together in a way that this sort of thing isn't going to be liable to happen. But all of that aside, I think back to last year. Otani basically went from build-up mode as a pitcher in the regular season to the intensity of postseason starts where adversity's around every corner, and frankly didn't really handle it that well. There was the game in Philly that he let get away from him late and had to be bailed out by Teoscar Hernandez's home run. There were the 2 World Series starts, including Game 7, when once it started going sideways, could not stop it. I think it is good that Otani is going through a stretch now as a pitcher where things aren't going right, and he ends up in these innings that kind of start going sideways on him, and he's going to have to figure out, like, at this stage with where his stuff is and where he's at as a pitcher, like, what do I need to turn to when it gets really hot, so that even in these kind of situations, I don't let it become a 3-run or a 4-run inning. He didn't get that experience at all last year, and while these starts maybe have cost him a chance to win the Cy Young, I think I've obviously left him very visibly frustrated. Not that Otani needs a lot of growing and learning moments, but I think when it comes to being a pitcher and learning how to navigate like these kind of, when I need to get to that next gear, when everything isn't going right, what do I kind of turn to? I think it's at least good that he's kind of wound up in these situations, these last couple outings that, have not gone perfectly the way the start of the season did for him.
I guess what I'm kind of wondering though is like with Yamamoto, right? When you kind of look at like last year and where it turned from him, it was after he got bombed in Milwaukee. And that's when he decided, you know what? I am calling my own pitches now. And
maybe this part of it.
Maybe this is where this goes now. I mean, with Anaheim, honestly, that kind of became a thing, right? I mean, he started calling it, there was a season where he was calling his own pitches, and honestly, it didn't always go great, right? And there were, I think, if you had asked people over there privately in their moments, right, they would have told you like, yeah, I'm not really sure this is the best idea. And obviously Otani's kind of got a lot on his plate right now, but hey, look at today.
Yeah, they'd finish strong. All right, before we get to Tony Gwynn Jr., anything else come out of these last couple days? I thoroughly enjoyed you and Vassay covered a lot of ground the other day.